from Berlin, and I like home office. Sadly, the home office is because of COVID. I have been doing data processing since 17 years, and today I mostly create reactive systems. In the current project, we are looking into the possibilities to use big data and reactive stream processing to make public transport more safe for risk groups. When it's more safe for risk groups, we are better and faster back to normal. Join me in making public transport better with big data. Join me to get out of home office. Hello everyone, and I'm glad to be here virtually in Vilnius, and I hope that you are all fine and well and everything is good at home. So I'm going to talk about what can we do with big data about public transport, and I'll tell you the story, what we experienced by the journey to support public transport by data analysis to bring down the corona numbers. So, but let's first start on the instance why public transport matters so much, and let's start by what I do. So I have a background, I'm a consultant and software engineer by heart. In our company, I am responsible for big data scenarios as a service. I'm still a blockchain believer. It's on the rise currently, I have seen. And I believe that data marketplaces are the future. And in fact, the tasks and challenges for public transports are very, very aligned to the things of data marketplaces. If data would be more free, more open, then a lot of people could do more analysis and we could have a bigger benefit for all. Ultimately, I believe in sustainability of our globe through big data. But let's start. Why does public transport matter so much? We have plenty of greenhouse emissions by different sectors. And a key sector that there is transport in general. So transport has a 13.2% for fuel that is burned and then CO2 in the hemisphere. And 40% of that is ultimately done by cars. And we can all ask ourselves, how much is it necessary to drive by car? Ultimately, the CO2 of cars is greater than the complete waste treatment on Earth. When we compare a car with a bus, then a bus is much, much more sustainable. It has 6 times less per passenger than a car. However, there are not only buses, there are other vehicles in public transport. And we have to see what matters. And ultimately, what matters are local public transport a lot. When we see here the numbers that we see here are from Germany, and we see that buses and trains in total are logically the highest numbers, since there are not so many trams and so on. But the local public transport total is quite high. So that means that not the long distance rail is the main thing. No, it's mainly to drive in your nearest neighborhood. When we look there, what is the impact factor? Then we can see that the local public transport with omnibuses is quite a high number that is taken by the people. And that means when we can optimize the buses, then we can save a lot of CO2 and we can try to save the planet. It will not be sufficient alone to do that, but it's one way. But let's look what happened in the past. In Germany, there were young pupils on the street, and I think all over Europe, demonstrating that the politicians need to do something. And one thing that these people asked on the street was to have a better public transport. So this discussion was really high boiled in Germany right before there was Corona. And then Corona broke in, and we had buses that were completely empty, and also other vehicles. But let's see, what did Corona exactly do in relation to carbon emissions? We can see that it's not the same in each country. We see that the carbon emissions were falling down differently in different countries. So, and it seems to be correlated to the impact on the economy of the country. So there is only little impact on China, but there is a large impact when the economy has been hit hard, roughly speaking. So what does a hit economy mean in relation to public transport and the emissions? So when we look at that, we have now the different changes in the carbon emissions. So that means the decreases. So we see the great story is the renewables were even better doing since the Corona crisis. And oil was really decreasing. So we see that oil is quite related to the Corona crisis. So we can say that there is a relation between oil usage, also for public transport and other stuff, and CO2 emissions. So one effect why Corona was somehow a little bit good for the climate is because the transport broke down. The question is, what do we do or what do we need to revive the public transport? Let's look at a concrete example. We have London here. Since May 2010, we have the buses overground. They are the most used overground vehicle, and the second most used vehicle is the tube. And there we see that it was relatively stable since 2010. But right after 2010, right after March, there was a spike down. And now, if we would be there in person, we could talk. I would ask you for your estimations how much it broke down. So what's the values that you think? So in fact, it broke down from buses 126 million meters to 40. So, and the underground was totally hit worse. And the number for the underground that is written here is wrong. It's 6. It's 6 dot something. However, it now comes back, but not completely like before Corona. So the people are still frightened. So the public transport providers worldwide, and in special in Europe, suffer the problem that they have less passengers. They have to deliver hygiene concepts. So what are the actual problems of the public transport providers in Corona? What is the problem that the passengers, that might seem obvious in the first place, do not use the public transport anymore? So what are the different stereotypes? One problem in public transport is anonymous infection chains. Often public transport providers say there is totally no risk to ride in public transport. In fact, it's not researched so deeply yet, but most likely when you only have a short contact that is below 15 minutes, it's relatively risk-free. But what happens if pupils ride to school together from different classes, from different schools. And I remember my school times, and the buses were really, really packed full. They were so full that no new pupils could go in. So when I imagine my school time, and I know that the buses are still quite full, then the problem is that the pupils spend longer than 15 minutes together in a quite packed bus. And they are from different schools, and they could, in theory, infect another. So a huge, huge challenge is that if Corona would spread far enough, and there would happen, that it would occur that infections happen in public transport, there would be a complete new way of spreading. So that is one thing to avoid the packed public transport. Next thing is risk groups. My grandma is around 90 years old. My grandfather is over 90 years old. And I think we all have relatives that belong to high risk groups. And if we do not have relatives, then we have friends. And these people should not be together in a bus when the bus is really packed. So they should have the possibility to avoid a full bus. Then, are all the people wearing their masks properly, or are they getting the mask below the nose like it's often seen? So most people are, let's say, obeying out of respect for others and for our societies, for our communities, the mask rules. I saw one statistic evaluation, and that was about Berlin, and they said then to 70 or 80% the people normally do it completely, but then there are the ones who don't. So that is a problem, and it's a problem in public transport, and we do not have knowledge normally how many people are wearing masks. Ultimately, for a public transport provider, it's not only about the health of the passengers. A public transport provider currently loses money, and they lose a lot of money. They would be, in theory, totally bankrupt through the corona crisis. So the government needs to give them more money, but normally they plan with the revenues of the ticket sale. So a public transport provider is caught in a situation where they are afraid to lose passengers when they tell the world openly and spread their data and their evaluation how many people are using when public transport, because that is a difficulty that might eat into their revenues. So what's the solution for that? The solution that we were thinking of in the summer was a corona occupation indicator. Simply said, a traffic light to say how full is the bus, when, or tram, or underground, and whatsoever. And we thought, when that can be done, then at least our grandparents, our beloved risk groups, our parents can check before they use it. And out of big data and some data science, we can train some models and make a forecast. How full will the bus when be? We approached with that idea the German Health Ministry, and they said it's really, really interesting. However, in the summer, the numbers were very low and the interest was not so large. Can that even work? If we can compute a corona risk out of the occupation, that I do not know. But what works for sure is to compute and to forecast the occupation of public transport, because South Korea is doing it since 10 years. So what works since 10 years in Korea can, in theory, also work in Germany. How do we show that then to the people? Every public transport provider, and there are many, it's very quite federalism in Germany, has most often an own app. So and they have different approaches to do that. So our thought was they can all build it in normal app, and first of all we should do a prototype that is running via a progressive web app that shows the occupation. Here is a screenshot of our current prototype, so that we see when are the vehicles leaving and how occupied are they most likely, and there are indicators where we have data or we don't have data. And we thought, okay, the public transport providers have some data sources that we could use, because ultimately they need to plan the traffic. In addition to that, once we analyze the data and we do a forecasting and we lift the public transport there to the next level, we will have the opportunity that there can be special dashboards, special analysis, and the public transport provider can even increase and improve their service for a better customer experience, to gain back the customers, to organize better how many vehicles are used at which time, to unstress the packed public transport, to gain more trust from the citizens, and ultimately to be better after Corona than before. However, sadly, it's not that simple. There is a real jungle of different data sources and of different circumstances how to manage all of that, to implement just a simple occupation indicator. So there are people counters partially in public transport. Most often, there are no people counters in buses. What is really sad, because buses are, like we discussed in the beginning, a main driver for public transport. So the people counters in buses are normally there to count the amount of people which go into the public transport and to see which lines are used. Then the peak numbers are cut, they are normalized, and then the different participants in the setting, in the public transport provider setting, in the city, there are multiple companies then driving under one ticket system, and all of these companies use the counting then to exchange at the end of the day revenues. So it's not built for the customers, but data is there. The problem is the data is cut, and the data has challenges like there is a line, and we all know that when a line in public transport just transforms into a new line, and there might be already people in the line. So that the new line does not start with 0 passengers, no, but there are already passengers in, and the people counters, they just have the incoming and the outgoing. So this data needs to be checked. In addition, the data sometimes has wrong entries because the counters got it wrong, so it needs to be cleaned. Lastly, the amount of people counters is often very low and rotated between the vehicles that are used. The rotation of the people counters, or the vehicles having the people counters driving on different lines, is then a challenge, because one does not have new data each day. So let's imagine you have 20% of people counters. That means one could, in theory, get new data each 5 days. And sometimes the people counters are rotated by random to ensure that it's statistically secure for distributing revenues. One could think the queries that are done in a mobile app or at the website are an indicator. In fact, local people in a city will not use that. They normally know the connections by heart, or they open an app, take the real-time data, and check when the next bus is coming. So one could say we use, instead of the queries, the real-time data. However, then we have some GDPR issues to check the geo-position of the person, to maybe track in which vehicle they are going. So that is not a feasible approach that is doable quickly in the Corona crisis. Ticket sales will normally not really correlate to short-term travel because one does not know how far the people go, and that's normally some very sensitive data where people are afraid of to give out. The next thing is maybe a public transport provider has the data, but the data is not given legally, so they cannot give it out of the declaration that it's secrecy, or maybe a company driving for a public transport provider union is declaring it as secret and they are totally not giving it out then. And maybe another company is having the data and the public transport provider would give it out, but it's technically not feasible. So the question is, where is the data physically? Is there access? And is it legal to access? That are then discussions that go since summer for us with different public transport providers. It's not so simple to just get the data when the data is there. Quite innovative approach that can be used is the Wi-Fi. Some public transport providers offer Wi-Fi in their vehicles, and Wi-Fi has a huge advantage compared to people counters. It could, in theory, say when is the person getting into the vehicle and when is the person getting out. So one would know the complete ride and not just the ins and outs of people. When that is tracked, then we have again a data privacy challenge where we have to negotiate with the data privacy officer, and it will take more or less till next year, so Corona will be over. Some challenge that we also had is the federalism, so there is always different unions of ticketing systems, and that is not uniform. So there is not just one public transport provider for a region, there are always multiple things, and it's then built together. So it's always hard to find the right people to talk to who ultimately do that. And latestly mentioned in the other points is the GDPR, so the data privacy issue that is always there and that needs always to be discussed. So, but let's imagine for 1 second, we have the data, or we have a mean to get the data in a way how we would need it. So let's imagine the following. We have the data, and let's look at that data. That data that we have there is real data out of from a public transport providers. And what we see there is that the busy hours from Monday to Saturday shift completely. And it's logical. The week is very, very different. So we have a shift. We cannot say Monday is like Saturday. And it's also not like Saturday in numbers. This is pre-Corona data. But even then, currently, it's still the same. The weekdays change the things because the people do not need to go to the office. So the packed hours shift depending on the weekday. And the challenge in Corona times is there are lockdowns. There are announcements in TV, or really lockdowns, decided lockdowns, but just the rise in Corona numbers changes the behavior and the fear of citizens. So that means that the trained models, when we do a forecast, might change. That is, in short, a concept drift. So that means we have the foundation of the predictions are not working. Let's imagine in Germany, we have now a new lockdown since 3 or 4 weeks. And what happens when this lockdown is there? The people use lesser public transport. So all the models that we would have learned before change, and when the models, when the numbers go up to a high amount, the people can be frightened. So we do not have a consistent model. We need data stream mining, which can deal with changing underlying world foundations and determine concept drifts. So let me do an example. If one would have forecasted the airplane travel for this summer season, they would have been wrong. But if we would not have had Corona, most likely the prediction for air traffic was always quite accurate in the past. So, but these predictions were completely wrong because the underlying world foundation changed. So, and when we talk about these concept drifts, we are talking about a top research topic in data science, data stream mining. And there we need different libraries, and we need to monitor our model, how healthy it is to see if it is still the capability to predict. It is ultimately not only depending on the technology. When we can do the forecasting, then the public transport providers need the possibility to react to the forecast. That means using more buses, using more trams, and buses need drivers. Trams need drivers. One needs more buses. It's not just a shifting. So maybe they are already at their limit. And currently they have limited financial power out of Corona. So public transport providers are in a situation that it's really, really hard to invest money into better service. So even if we can predict, there are public transport providers who are not capable to change because they do not have the money. And then they only can lose because they can lose passengers that they currently need to get the money that they are requiring to not go bankrupt. So it's the catch-22 situation. When we can predict and then the public transport provider reacts, then we also have to integrate the data, how the situation was resolved. Because when there is now then automatically an additional carriage in a tram, then the tram will not be so full anymore. So we need to respect that in our prediction model. Last but not least, we are talking about training a model and we are talking about forecasting. So the question is, how fast do we need the data? And partially, the data is still copied with USB sticks in the evening. When a bus comes into the yard, then someone goes in the bus and gets then a USB stick. Or maybe, if more modern, the bus uploads the data in the yard via Wi-Fi. But to get it in real time would be the best solution, because then one could say, okay, we had that and that adjustment on that day, and we can adjust our model based on changed morning data in the afternoon, and we see it. So we never know when and how quickly the data will be delivered. So the analysis and the prediction will not work precisely in this Corona ages, because the complete world of the changes is not stable enough. So what is our proposed solution? We thought a while, we discussed with public transport providers, and we discussed really with many of them. We spent a lot of time to see what we can do. And then we saw that out of the lacking data, there will always not be sufficient data. So the idea is to provide people a reporting feature where they can say, the bus that I am currently in, or the tube, is full. And why should someone do that? Because We all have the relatives that we could notify. And when enough people just report when things are full, then we have the data faster because the people could do it via their smartphone when we have a progressive web app for that. And they can also report even if the people wear masks. Then there would be valid data, no legal issues, no other tech is needed. Other tech is optimal. We could use, we will use people counters in addition to that, but it's an addition. So there is not a complete dependency. And ultimately, I'm always thinking about Germany since I'm from there, but there is a whole world out there. And once there is a solution developed, it could, in theory, be deployed easily in all other countries as well that are hardly hit by Corona, that might even not have people counters at all, or not open authorities which want to really improve the situation. So one thing remains when we have that, that is clearly the data cleansing, more or less it's spam is a risk. But since we do not know if the people and how the people will use it, we always think with an entrepreneurial spirit and say, we go and we try. Then we can work with everything and we can see how good it works. So what is our next station with that solution? How far are we in the journey? Sadly, not as far as we wanted to be out of coordination with others, since it's not a pure technological problem. So we are in final collaborations discussion with some public transport providers and the German Health Ministry, how we align that best together. We have already built some prototypes for the application and for the data integration. We already got the data models. So, and soon, hopefully soon, and before Christmas, we will get the first data deliveries that we then can integrate in the data model, so that people counters and some other data sources from public transport. And then when we have that, we want to roll out the prototype also with the reporting in addition to the people counted data and release that. Then we want to gain feedback from the community, because ultimately such a solution only works if people work together. And our goal is also to open source the progressive web app that is the front end that you saw on the slides before. Then with the feedback that we gain, we want to iterate and see how it helps. So in short, what is the conclusion and the learnings that we did? Public transport matters for Corona and global. And the largest fear that I personally have is that the Corona crisis, after the public transport numbers were growing since years, will be a reset for people to use their private car. So when Corona is over and everything goes more or less back to normal business, and if all the people who used public transport before go and use their car, Corona was really worse for the environment. So I think it's absolutely necessary to prepare for that case and to think how public transport can be improved, because it's a very, very needed ingredient to fight global warming, and also that the cities have a better living space. That's a sad lesson. When you are a technologist, you know you can do it, and you see legal blockers discussions, and you know what would be possible and what would be the impact. And you see, it's not only about technology, it's a lot about other things. So when I just imagine that we started to talk in June with the health ministry, and it needed the reality that there is really the physical winter. I mean, we have winter each year in Germany. It was clear that the people will be inside. And at the same time, it was also clear that Corona will have a large impact for public transport. And when I see that it would be technologically possible, but it's just stretched, that makes me personally sad. But good news is the first release will happen very, very soon. So that will be realistically in January. And we are very open for collaborations and also very open for your feedback. So I'm very curious for your questions. And since we are kicking the project and we have the necessary stakeholders now on board, clearly we are hiring. So what I said in my beginning motivating speech, that you can join our journey out of home office, I meant it physically, or let's say remotely, to call it at best. And so we are hiring. And if you have feedback about the project, clearly please drop an email, or if you are curious about the release, it will not be just a project, it's also about the release and sharing the information, since our goal is then to at least open source the front end of the application. So I thank you all for listening, and now I'm curious for your questions. Let me open Slido. That is an interesting question. How much would it cost for a government? There are many, many factors, because they have long-running costs with their vendors, long-running contracts with their vendors. I mean, I could only answer that from an IT perspective, and the IT perspective is not so much the problem, but the problem is who has the data? Do they share the data? What would they want for the data? There are public transport providers who do not even own their own data about the running. So you have to imagine that's also partially different. So you cannot say it so simply and so generally, because there are a lot of discussions needed. I tell you from my perspective, it's a lot more expensive than I thought in the first place, because it's this people business. So are there any more questions? Okay, good. Then I thank you everyone for listening, and I wish you a great continuing virtual conference. Thank you for your attention.